Oh,
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new webinar. We're here with attorney Cynthia Milian, and we're going to talk to you about how you can prepare for a credible fear interview. So Cynthia, she is a senior associate attorney on Powers Law Group. Can we go to the next slide, please? She has been licensed since 2018. She has been president in Hispanic Law Students Association. She is very fluent in Spanish also, and she's a great part of our team. So, Cynthia, the word is yours.
thank you, Maria, for that kind introduction. So we're talking a little bit, today we're going to talk about credible fears. And the reason why this is something important that we're talking about is because we have seen many cases recently of individuals that have had cases where they were pending with USCIS, where maybe they say that they're denying them or that they're terminating them just because they have some sort of expedited removal order. And in order to see, what exactly you can do with this, right? There's several guidelines where you can check the basis of your asylum case, check that it's still pending. You can get, request your file. Or another thing that you can do is prepare yourself so that you can request a credible fear if you've never been through one, so that you can have an opportunity to go before a body of law that can look and see whether or not you meet the requirement to then apply for asylum. That's what a credible fear interview is. And it's very important for you to understand that if you pass your credible fear interview, that's just the first step in you being able to qualify for asylum, but it does not necessarily mean that you have gotten asylum. So things that you should consider or know is that it's usually conducted by USCIS or asylum officer. This is something that is triggered when you tell them you're afraid to return to your country of birth or where you're coming from, and the standard is typically lower than the full asylum standard. If you have a positive credible fear, then you are placed in proceedings, or the opportunity opens up so that you can now apply for asylum. If you don't receive a positive credible fear, then you do have an opportunity to appeal, but the appeal is very limited. Okay, so let's talk about the legal and the procedural context. So when you're detained at the border, or what we're seeing now is a lot of people that were detained and that were subsequently released, filed an asylum application, and now they're saying that it's being terminated. When you were detained, Customs and Border Patrol will ask you if you return. If yes, and that triggers a provision on a form called the M44. Well, it basically asks a bunch of questions of why you are afraid to return to your home country. So this credible fear interview is typically not adversarial, but it is taken under oath, right? So important things that you should know, it's applied in, happens usually in expedited removal zones. So usually if you're at a port of entry, that's where you'll usually have one conducted, or if you are detained, it happens within a few days of detention. Like I said, it could be in a detention facility or it could be by video. If a officer determines that you are not credible, that there is no credible fear, then you can appeal it before a judge. And after that, the judge can either overturn the decision or they can sustain the decision. But after that, you can't appeal it to another body of law. So, what are the standards to meet in order for you to qualify for a credible fear? So, you need to show that there's a significant possibility of proving that if you were persecuted, that if you were, right, that it was on account of a protected ground. Now, these are the same protected grounds that you need to establish if you were to request asylum. So, it's based on your race, your religion, your nationality, if you belong to a particular social group, or your political opinion. Also, there's the Convention Against Torture, where you must show that you are more likely than not to be tortured. There's no final decision on your asylum eligibility now, only whether or not you can proceed. And again, there's bars to asylum that an asylum officer can essentially or quickly determine or pick up on whenever they're doing this interview. So, for example, if you have criminal history or if you firmly resettled in another country, that is, that if you were on your way from, let's say, from Nigeria to the US and you stopped in Brazil and they offered you permanent residency, then that could be a bar for you to qualify for asylum at some point in the future. So it's very important for you to be prepared, because a lot of the times these credible fear interviews can be denied due to a lack of detail or if there's inconsistencies in statements. And officers usually look for specific, believable, and consistent accounts of what is happening, right? If an officer is going through and interviewing people and they all have the same story and the same person that kidnapped them, based on the different adjectives that the individuals are using and the different scenarios are the same, then that's not going to be very believable, right? So you want to make sure that you give details of an account. First of all, you don't want to lie because this is all under oath, and you want to be detailed and want to be consistent, right? You want to make sure that there are no contradictions that are going to damage your credibility, and you want to make sure that you organize your story in a way that it's easy to follow so that you can highlight those facts that are important that can connect to the protected ground. So if you were in a political demonstration, right, and the reason for why you are requesting asylum or you want to remain here in the US is because you were politically involved, and there were 4 instances when that happened where you were threatened, persecuted, or harmed, that you want to make sure that you highlight that during your interview to show that that persecution existed. So you also want to make sure that you practice telling your story so that you're calm, and that way you can meet that criteria of significant possibility that you would be tortured or persecuted if you were to return to your home country. So it's very important to do all of that in a very concise manner. Other things that you want to do is gather your personal history, right? And in order for you to maintain consistency, right, you want to know if you, back to that example, right, if you were involved in these political protests or there were several instances where you were threatened, killed, well, not killed, right, because you're still alive, but if you were threatened or if you were hurt, when did it happen? What month? What year? What was the season like, right? All of these details are very important for the officer to know, right? Who were the individuals that were targeting you? How do you know they were from the government? What were they wearing? They have any clothing that identified them as part of the government? So all of these are very important details. So you want to write it all down, right? When you are testifying or giving your interview, you may not have access to your documents, but you want to make sure that you have all of this prepared in advance so that it's easier for it to come out when you're talking. So another important thing that you want to do is, excuse me, craft a clear narrative, right? So what is the background? How did you become involved in this political group in your home country? How often? When did things begin to get a little bit difficult for this political group? When did things start escalating? Why wasn't there any protection for you in the country? Who was targeting you? Why were you targeted? How did this affect you emotionally, psychologically? How, if you were hurt, did you go to the doctor? Why didn't you go? If it was a politically, there was political persecutions, did this prohibit or inhibit you from, climbing up professionally? Or what employment opportunities did you not get because of this? All of this. And then you want to end with why it is that you fear returning now. The situation has gotten worse, or the news articles, purport to say that the situation has probably improved, then how are you going to counterattack that and say, you know what, that's what the media says, but in reality, this is how the situation is in our country. All right, so know the interview format. So you're going to be placed under oath first. The officer is going to ask you open-ended questions, and then the officer will ask follow-up questions to clarify things that he. Sorry about that. And just know that the interview can be recorded. You will have an interpreter that will be provided if needed. And then the officer will evaluate these answers, the demeanor, the consistency. And know that at some times, these interviews are conducted so quickly that you may not even have an opportunity to have an attorney with you. But other times there are opportunities where the attorneys can be on, but an attorney can't really say much. All we can do is listen in, right? And if maybe the interpreter or the officer is misinterpreting something, then that's when we can step in. But an attorney's role is very limited in these credible fear interviews. So if you don't understand something, if they are asking a question and you don't really know what is being asked, ask for them to repeat it or clarify it, so that way you answer in a proper way. Other things to consider prior to the interview, talk, if you are detained, if you don't have access to an attorney, you want to see if maybe there's a free legal list services that you can talk to, or if there are any materials that are provided around that can assist you in preparing for this. Practice your answers with someone that you trust, things that are general, like why are you leaving your country? What happened to you? How did they know who you were? When did it happen? Why are you afraid to return? All of that, very key information, and you want to make sure that you have a good roadmap so that you can give this and give all as much detail as possible so that you're found credible to move on to the next step. You also want to mentally prepare yourself because maybe you've never told the story and it's an event that could be very traumatizing, and maybe you've never opened up. So you want to be prepared for these sensitive questions that can trigger a lot of emotional, emotional trauma. And you want to be careful and you want to be ready to answer all that. Okay. And as you are communicating, right, use your own language. Don't try to do this in English, even if you know a little bit. Do it in your native language so that way you can more easily articulate what it is that you are afraid of and why you are afraid to return to your home country. Speak clearly and slowly. Give complete and concise answers. If you don't remember something, explain why it is that you don't remember instead of guessing, right? If you don't remember something because of the trauma or because you were knocked unconscious, or it was something that maybe you've blocked from your head because of how traumatic it was, give that answer versus just guessing or saying, I don't know, right? And make sure, very important, and I'll reiterate this again, be consistent, right? This credible fear interview could be used, if you pass it, it's something that could be used and even brought up at some point years later at an asylum hearing before a judge. So the story that you tell, during credible fear interview is basically the foundation of what you're going to use at some point in the future to continue with your asylum claim. So make sure that everything that you say, is correct, and that you've truly, really practiced all this and known the facts, the dates, and all that, because at some point in the future, you don't want this credible fear interview to be used against you so that they could discredit you and discredit your testimony. If you have documenting evidence or supporting evidence, sometimes they will allow you to submit this, especially if you have to appeal it. So have all of these documents in order, right? So if you were involved in a political protest and you were harmed and you were shot at, or, due to that, you have suffered, physical, ailments, have those medical reports ready. If you were able to file police reports, have those police reports. If you received any threats via email or physical mail, have all of that ready and prepared to present to support your credible fear testimony. Okay. And also, if they don't ask for it, you want to make sure that you tell the officer the evidence that you have and how it relates to your fear, so that way they can know that you have documentation to prove it all. All right, so if the interview is positive, like I mentioned, the next steps are you're going to have an asylum interview. You could get scheduled for an asylum. Well, you apply for asylum, and then you can get scheduled for an asylum interview with USCIS, depending on where you're at. Or if you are placed in removal proceedings, then the next step, once you apply for asylum, is to present your case. After you have a master initial calendar, an initial hearing, you'll get scheduled for a final hearing before an immigration judge. So like I said, the credible fear interview transcript becomes a part of that asylum record. So make sure that what you say at that credible fear interview is your story, is what truly happened to you, because you are stuck with that throughout the duration of your case. All right. And if let's say the credible fear interview is not approved, if it's denied, you can have a judge review that. And usually it's very quickly, where the judge will review the credible fear results, and you can present the case to the court. If maybe you didn't have evidence that was available to you initially, you can present this evidence to the judge, and he can take that into consideration in reevaluating whether or not you have a credible fear interview. Now, after you go before a judge, if the judge affirms the decision and finds that you don't have credible fear, there is no other avenue from which you can appeal this decision. Okay. All right, so make sure that you don't give vague or overly general answers. Don't contradict yourself. Mention all of your critical events. Don't provide a bunch of irrelevant details that distract from the main point or the things that really did transpire that caused you to flee from your country. And always make sure that you connect the reason for why you were persecuted or for why you fled your country to that protected ground. All right. And so, like I mentioned, you have a right to several different things during this process. One is to an interpreter in your preferred language. If you need to take breaks throughout the interview, if you need to just gather yourself and compose yourself, do that. You can reach out to legal service providers to see if they are available for any sort of training ahead of time. Also, you have the right to communicate with an attorney in advance. If you have, depending on how quick they schedule you, you can talk to an attorney that can prepare you, go through all that we've discussed today so that you can be prepared for that credible fear interview. And I'll pass it over to Maria, who will give you more information about our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Well, you can find us on all social media. We're on Facebook, X, on TikTok, Instagram. We also have a new social media, which is Blue Sky. You can scan the QR code on the screen, and that way you can subscribe to our newsletter where we are sending constant information with immigration news. Also, you can find us on our webpage. It's www.rubypowerslaw.com, or you can call our number at 713-589-2085. For the rest of the month of August, well, we already saw a little bit about the perm labor certification process. We're going to be seeing consequences of circumventing legal immigration channels, also defending your case in immigration court while detained, and also about VAWA protections. So thank you very much for being here with us, and we hope to see you soon.